Good morning. My name is Ray Nenow, and as always, it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to share with you. I'd like to start out actually around 50 years ago, a little more than 50 years ago. I got on an airplane, and actually, I was on Travis Air Force Base. I was 19, had just turned 19 years old, and I was on my way to Vietnam. I was all by myself. There was no one there with me. And you realize where you're about to go. And I got on that airplane and flew. And when I got off in Vietnam, I had gone there thinking, well, I'm in the Air Force. It's not going to be all that bad. I'm on an air base. And I remember getting out of the plane, walking down the plane, and all I saw was craters. And I had landed during Tet Offensive, and the Tet Offensive had blown up parts of the runway and put holes in. And I was 19 years old, and it was a frightening time. I remember they issued us helmets, flak vests, and gave me my M16. I went to my hut. My hut was basically sandbags all around it, and I went in and met several men there at that time. And those men became very important men in my life. Because, it's when you go through things like that, you're in the middle of a war. I mean, I didn't even understand what that meant. I mean, our base was attacked over 100 and some times in a year. And these men that were with me became very, very important men, because it was each of us depending on each other just to get through. You don't realize what that means until you go through it. But even to this day, 50 years later, I'm still in correspondence with them, and I talk to them. I actually just met up with one of them a few years ago again. But every time we write to each other or something, it always ends it's always the last word is friends for life. We became friends for life because of all the things that happened to us. We got each other through. Well, I moved here almost 30 years ago. And now, I don't only have friends for life, I have eternal friends now. I go to a church that is very meaningful to me. It helps me. And it helps me in all the things that I do. I mean, Vietnam was a very important time in my life, and I made it through, and I have friends that I made it through with. But now I have friends that they're like brothers, they're like sisters, they're like moms, they're like dads, they're like uncles, because of what happens on a daily basis, what I've gone through, what I've seen happen. And really, it's what the church should be. The church is just not an occasional, let me go there Sundays and, I'm done with doing my duty and I'm gone. The church in the Old Testament, they gathered all the time together. They were part with each other. The disciples, they traveled with Jesus. They were with him all the time. They left their work. They did whatever was necessary. It was all it was their life. So much, of my life, prior to actually coming here, church was a second thought. I did my work, I did my jobs, I tried to build my empires, and then every now and then I would go to church. Now my life is, church is my life because Jesus is my life. And Jesus is at the very center of that. And when we go to church, we learn how to worship him. We learn, the word of God. His prophetic word comes forth through his preachers and his teachers. And it's all part of something very special. And it builds who we are, and we become who we are. A disciple, one of Jesus' disciples asked him, he said, what's the greatest commandment that there is? And in Luke 10:27-37, he says, Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live, enjoy active, blessed, endless life in the kingdom of God. He goes on and he talks about the Good Samaritan. And really, when I think about our church and I think about all that has been done for me and my family and my friends, our church is very much Good Samaritans. So that gentleman that the disciple says, and he asked Jesus, he says, who is my neighbor? And Jesus, talking up, replied, he gave him a parable or a story. He said, a certain man was going from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him of his clothes and belongings and beat him, and they went their way, unconcerningly, leaving him half dead as it happened. Now, by coincidence, a certain priest was going down along the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And so much that's what happens in very religious churches and people. You know, they go to church, but they go to church more out of their religion. They go to church just to, because for whatever reason, it's a good political thing to do. It's, they feel obligated to do it, but they don't see the needs of the other people. Or if they see the needs, which is even worse, of the other people, they walk by on the other side and they just ignore that it was there. And then it said a Levi likewise came down to the place, and he saw him, and he passed by the other side of the road as well. The Levite, he represents all those legalistic people that quote you all the scriptures and tell you all the things, but then when it becomes time to see the scriptures actually work in their lives or in their church, they fail to do it. They fail to do it. And there's so many churches out there where that's true. They're walking down the other side of the road as well, ignoring the very people that have great need. But it said a certain Samaritan. And a Samaritan, back in that time, it wasn't a loved person. A Samaritan was considered a half-breed. A Samaritan was half Gentile, half Jew. He wasn't a real Jew. And he traveled along and he came to where this man was, and he saw him. And it says he was moved with pity and sympathy for him. And he went to him and he dressed his wounds, pouring on them oil and wine. Then he set him on his own beast, and he brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, 2 days' wages, and he gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I myself will repay you when I return. Then Jesus said, which of these 3 do you think proved himself a neighbor to him who fell among the robbers? He answered, the one that showed him pity and mercy. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. And that's what I find in the church that I go to. I find that there truly are Samaritans, and they go and do likewise. When I came here, I was a mess. People reached out to me. But the people that I've met, like I said in the beginning, the people that I've met now, they're eternal friends. The people in Vietnam, they're lifelong friends, and they are good friends. But the people that I live with and are part of, or I do work with, or I go to church with now, they're eternal friends. I'm going to spend eternity with them. They're going to make sure that I'm there. I'm going to make sure that they're there. We're going to work with each other. I remember there's a group of us actually that I call them the breakfast bunch. There's about 4 or 5 of us, and they get together and we go to Denny's and we meet and we spend time together. It's not just in Denny's, but we happen to go to breakfast as well and meet. Many of us are in the prison ministry together. Many of us do, other things together. We work together. We're party. We're part of each other on our daily lives. But in Hebrews 10:24-25, it says this. He says, and let us consider and give attentive continuous care to watching over one another, studying how we may stir up, stimulate, and incite to love and helpful deeds and noble activities with each other. It says, not forsaking or neglecting the assembly of ourselves together as believers, as the habit of some people are, but admonishing, warning, urging, and encouraging one another, and all the more faithfully as you see that day approaching. Well, it's obvious the day is approaching. And I know when we get together in those breakfasts, we really, it's a time to check each other out. It's a time to see, we doing okay? Are you doing okay? Yeah, I'm doing okay. It's interesting because one of the man that's there, he's kind of new. He's new to the church. He's been in the church maybe a year and a half, and he always tells people, he says, all these guys really helped me. He said, each one of them helped me. And when he says it, we all always turn to him and say, yeah, Butch, but this man helped me. And the other one says, yeah, well, he helped me. And that's the way it is in the church. We try to help each other. And when we see each other there in need, we gather with each other. We pray for each other. We pray that, that we can truly, like it says, incite and stimulate the gifts of God in them. We need those gifts of God. We need the gifts of God in each other. There was a family, we've taken in a lot of people in our house since we've been here. We've been here 30 years, and they try to help each other. You reach out and you take people in. There was a family from South Carolina, and the family was peach farmers, and they also grew other vegetables. And I remember my family would got to know them very well. They would come Sundays. Their daughter stayed with us, and they would come Sundays to spend the time after church, and we would always have a roast and mashed potatoes, gravy, and you'd sit around the table and share with each other and get to know each other. And it was truthfully, it was like a night and day experience here. I'm a city dweller. Farms, I didn't even know what a farm was. He was a farmer. He's a peach farmer, a butter bean farmer. And it was funny because my family, we went down and we got to eat the peaches and stuff right off the trees. And it's like, well, the only place I ever got peaches was in the grocery store. I didn't, it was a strange phenomenon. And the next thing was that he invited us down one day. He invited me down with another gentleman, and he brought us down there to sort butter beans. Well, first of all, I didn't even know what a butter bean was. I thought they looked like lima beans. And then the next thing I know, he brings out these beans, and they're all speckled. And I'm like, well, what's that? He says, oh, that's a speckled butter bean. But, we grew to love that family. That it was a very special time getting to know them. And that's what the church is all about. Getting to know the people, getting to be part of their lives, them becoming part of your lives. He would share things. He was the one that shared with me about the farmer when he plows his field, how he looks always straight ahead so as not to waver. And that was such a spiritual principle in me to understand, because that's what Jesus always said. Put your hand to the plow and don't look back. But he was the one that shared it in actuality to me, that I finally understood it in a real way. And again, that's what the church is, becoming very real. But there's a verse. I want to read the verse in Acts. It says, Acts 2:46, 47. It says, after that day, they regularly assembled in the temple with a united purpose. And in their homes they broke bread, including the Lord's Supper. They partook of their food with gladness, simplicity, and generous hearts, continuously praising God and being in favor of and goodwill with all the people. And the Lord kept adding to the number daily those who were being saved from the spiritual death. That's what was happening in that home. We were breaking bread together. We were becoming part. We were praising God for what he was doing, in the lives. We watched that young lady meet a gentleman who eventually started to come to those lunches as well, and they became, husband and wife. And actually, he's been on and he's shared on here. He's from here locally. But I mean, it's such a privilege to be part of that church and to be part, really, of the whole move of God that's going on, in our lives. I know that Galatians 6:1-2 says, "Brethren, if any person is overtaken in misconduct or sin of any sort, you who are spiritual, who are responsible to and controlled by the Spirit, should set him right and restore him and reinstate him, without any sense of superiority and with all gentleness, keeping an attentive eye on yourself, lest you should also be tempted." He says, "Bear, endure, carry one another's burdens and troublesome moral faults, and in this way fulfill and observe the perfect law of Christ." And what was that law? Love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, and complete what is lacking in your own obedience to it. Many times that was me. I mean, I watched many times when you start, in the early days when you waver, and, there was always someone right there. I have I have the privilege of two ladies that, have been like sisters. I have a mom and my pastor, Jane Whaley. I have a dad and Papa Sam. And they're always there. They're there if that wavering occurs. And, one of my best friends has gone through a whole lot of things, and they were there with him, And sometimes it was stronger words, and sometimes it was easy words. But those words were always there, always there for us. I remember, like I'd already shared this, but, not the full story, but my mom came here and spent a whole year here. And while she was here, she was bedridden the whole time. And people from the church, nurses from the church, some of them that weren't nurses or some of them were training in nurses, they volunteered because we set up like a hospital room in my living room, and they volunteered to be there. And they would come and take shifts. And I had a gentleman that, was living there at that time that was studying to be a doctor, and he would come and help. And it was an unbelievable thing because it wasn't a major burden. I mean, she couldn't get in and out of her bed, and so it was, every day was difficult. My wife was a blessing of blessings. She spent so much time with my mom, but it was watching that and watching the church function, watching the whole journey, of it. When my mom passed, she passed in such peace, but my house was immediately filled with people. People came. They came from a whole part of the church. They made sure that house was cleaned up and changed. Doctors, nurses showed up. They called the appropriate people, And not only did they do that, but I was on the phone with my mom and my dad talking about Papa Sam and Jane, and they were praying for me. And people came and prayed, and it was a glorious time. It was not a difficult time because people were there. The church was in its place. That multi-sided church that sees a need and then goes. It's not the religious man that walks on the other side of the street and passes it up and says, "It's not me." It was not that Levite that lived by the law, but then the law meant nothing. It was a Samaritan. Many times we're criticized who we are, and people look at us. Many times they look at us like those Samaritans, those half-breeds. It's a word of faither. He's over there. But you know what? That word of faithers, they were there. They were in my house, immediately. They brought food. They brought themselves. I didn't spend any time alone. People came, made sure I was with me. My family was there. They were with us all. And then when we went to be part, and we did a service of kind of, we did a service, and I remember the people, it was such a rejoicing time. Death, like I said before, had no sting there. We were rejoicing together, and everybody was there, and they were all, just supportive of who I was and supportive of my family and my children. My children had lost a grandma, and they were all around us, And I remember the one gentleman, he sings in the sweet by and by, and it was such a rejoicing in that song. It was such an uplifting. It wasn't the devil didn't have a victory. He didn't have a victory in it. God had a victory. And the church, again, was in its place. There's a song. I'm not going to say it. I'm going to give you the words. But there's a song, and this is what the whole message today is really about. It's a song that says, I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. I've been washed in the fountain, cleansed by his blood. I'm a joint heir with Jesus as I travel this way, sod. For I'm a part of the family of God. And that's what this is, the church. It's the family of God. And it's not just the church. I have many friends beyond the church that were right there as well. But the church is the one in my immediate need. That's my immediate family, as you say. And it says, he says, you'll notice that we say brother, sister around here. Because we do. Because they are brothers. They are sisters. It says it's because we're a family and they are so near. When one has a heartache, we all share the tears and rejoice with each other in this family so dear. That's what we do. We rejoice with each other. If someone has a heartache, we're there. We're there to pray. We're there to sing. We're there, whatever. I remember so much, you're in the hospitals or people in the hospitals and people are on the phone and they're singing to the people. They're rejoicing with them. They're trying to bring them to a place, where their spirits are uplifted. They're trying to, as it said in the beginning, to incite, to just stir up that gift of God and that God would be present in their lives. And, it's a family so dear, as it says. Romans 10, well, I want to talk about one other family because they were special. Well, there's many. I could go on and on and on and on, but I want to talk about them because I want to read a verse. And like many times here, I lose my place, but here I found it. But this was a family that, my wife and I spent a long time, well, many times. We went several times. I went several times. My wife and I went a couple times to Scotland, and we became very good friends with a family over there. And we got to share in their church and everything, but an occasion occurred, and, the church separated for a long time. And I want to read this verse because this verse really says, what occurred and what happened. Galatians 6:9-10 says, let us not lose heart and grow weary and faint in acting nobly and doing right. For in due time and in an appointed season we shall reap, if you do not loosen and relax your courage and faint. So then, as occasion and opportunity open up to us, let us do good morally to all people, not only being useful or profitable to them, but also doing what is their spiritual good and advantage. Be mindful to be a blessing, especially to those of the household of faith, those who belong to the God's family with you. And these folks, that's what they were. They were like family. He was like a brother. And that separation, it was difficult. But I remember one day, and I was out cutting the lawn, and my wife Brenda came to the door, and she said, Harry's on the phone. This was years later, and I thought, isn't that amazing? And what ended up happening? He ended up coming to America. He brought his family. He ended up living with us for 7 years. It says, Don't lose heart. Don't grow weary and faint in acting nobly. Just keep hanging in there. God's got a hold. He's got a hold of these people. It's important to see that. He's got a hold. In Romans 13:10, it says, love does no wrong to one's neighbor. It never hurts anybody. Therefore, love meets all requirements of fulfilling the law. Besides this, know what you are in this crucial hour, how it's high time for you to wake up, from your sleep. Rouse yourself to reality, for salvation's final deliverance is nearing us now. Now that we first began, believed, and adhered to, and trusted in, and relied on Christ. It says the night's gone. The night is gone and the day is almost here. Let us drop. Let's fling away the works and deeds of darkness. We need to come and understand it's time in our lives to allow God to be part of who he wants to be in our life. All these people that are around you and surround you, in your life, when you really begin to, as it says, it talks about, we start at that time with him. And now's a critical hour. You go to church, you do all these things. For years I went to church. And then for years I didn't. But yet God was still trying to be part of my life. And so much so that he finally, it took me going to Russia. I ended up going to Russia because it was a mess, and I had an artist that worked with me in the music business, and he saw that I was a mess. He invited me to go to Russia, and I went to Russia. When I went to Russia, I saw Christians, and I saw Christians, they went to church, and when they went to church, they risked their lives. They risked imprisonment. They risked being part of a gulag out somewhere in the middle of Siberia. But everywhere I went in Russia, I heard about a church in North Carolina. They had been in Russia. They had traveled throughout Russia. The gentleman that was the interpreter was their interpreter when they had come. And all he did was talk about them. The artist that was with me, all he did is talk about them. So, one day I decided to journey to North Carolina. And when I came, all I found was the love of God. I found this incredible love of God. I walked in the door and it was nothing but love. And my life was a mess. I'd been a Christian for a while, or I'd lived a Christian life for a while. And then I'd also been involved in the Christian music business. And, it had grown to a point in my life that there wasn't a whole lot of Christian in the Christian music business. There was a lot of problems. And my life was a mess. And now I came here and all I saw was the love of God. I saw the love of people. And like I said, there was two two ladies there. And they took hold of me. And they would lay down their lives. They would deal with me. I never had people deal with me at those levels. And Pastor Sam and his wife, they'd be in my face. I'm a pretty good sized man, and I'm a pretty intimidating man, and that's the way I live my life. But I'll tell you, they were always there for me. They loved me. They cared about me. I was the neighbor that they saw in their lives, and they were the Good Samaritans. And they came and met me where I needed to be met. I want to just thank you today. I want to encourage you, don't walk on the other side. When you see a need in a person, go over and help them. Don't be the religious person. Don't be the man that's all following the law. Be the Good Samaritan today. Go and help the man. Go and help the woman. Go and help the neighbor. Love the neighbor as yourself. Find a church like I've found. that are there for you when you need to be there, someone there for you. Thanks for being here today. We're here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8:30. You can go to our website, www.wordoffaithfellowship.org. See the other friends, see many of the people that I talked about today. Thank you. You all have a good day.